What's up everyone, this is Nick from Catskill Mountain Customs here in upstate New York. I've got this little CB450 here I've been chipping away at for a buddy of mine, and in this video we're going to be making a new rear fender. Here is the original fender I made for the bike. Got my tape here, I'm just going to pull some measurements to see where I'm at. So this is 6 inches across the top from turned flange to turned flange, and overall I've got 30 inches. So I'm happy with the length, I'm going to keep that, but I actually pulled the tire width, and the tire width is 6.5 from what you could call the edge of the tire to the edge of the tire. So this fits over it because of the radius differences, but it's definitely a little too tight. So I'm going to figure out what measurements I want to give me the clearance I need, and then I think I'm going to go ahead and make a quick buck out of MDF to work off of. It's going to be a lot easier, and it's going to make sure I hit those marks and get the clearance I need when I'm all done. Okay, I've got my materials here to start patterning this fender. I'm going to make it in 3 pieces. So the top section and about 1-inch flange on each side will be one piece, and then the 2 skirts will be a separate piece. So I've got some paper here. This is just basic masking paper. I picked up from like Lowe's or Home Depot. Comes in a roll like this. You can get it longer. Paper type seems to be a personal preference. There's not one type that necessarily works better than others. You kind of see what you like to work with and what your method is. Some guys use a heavy poster board. I don't particularly like that, but again, it's to each his own. So, I'm going to make sure I have enough to mark out my flange, and I'll start just tacking this in place nice and tight along the backbone of the buck. So I'm just going to roughly trim off the excess and just leave enough, about 1-inch flange. Okay, so now you can see paper doesn't want to sit along these stations, because just like the metal, the paper will have to be shrunk in order to sit flush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the middle here and begin making some folds in the paper over top of the stations. So the paper sit flush against the station. There we go. Alright, once we get the shaping this in metal, I'll be able to demonstrate what's going on and what needs to be done to get that reversed. It's kind of hard to show here in the paper because the paper wants to crinkle. But you can see we're going from shrinking down the whole area into the reverse right at the end where we transition to stretching the material. So now I'm just going to go back and now more carefully mark the edges of my stations here where the flange is going to be. And then we can get this trimmed up, and we could also mark where the shrinks are, and how far in they go is also important for the way we're going to make this. And when I cleaned up the pattern, I just used a straight edge along the marks I had made at the end of the stations, get some nice straight lines there. I measured off 1 inch, left some material for my flange, just freehand traced around the marks I made on the front, show the radius on the front. I also folded the pattern in half to check that everything was relatively symmetrical and get a center line in case I need it. So I've got a piece of 18 gauge cold rolled steel here. Just cut it out roughly, got it nice and clean. Lay my pattern on. Now let's grab a couple of magnets. Just hold it down. I have a center punch. I'm also going to grab my scribe. I'm going to start by making scribe marks along the outside edge. I'm just going to scratch right through the paper. And mark it off so we can see it. So when I bring it over my power hammer, I'm going to use a thumbnail shrinking die. I'm going to run my shrink in to the depth of my folds. You can see how even they relatively are. They're tight in here, kind of widen out, tight, then real wide as we get towards the reverse. So I'll do a shrink right where the V is, and then I'll do that basically. Because as this material pulls in at the V's, the material towards the sides are also going to want to pull in, or it's going to ruffle up. So I'm basically going to shrink in this pattern. And depending on what the metal is telling me as I do this, I might do another smaller ones in here. So I'm going to transfer this outside line with my scribe, so I have that. I got my scribe marks up here. And I'm going to jump on the power hammer and we can finally start shaping some metal. I've got the hammer set up here with a number 4 radius die and a flat top die, and I'm just smoothing out some of the areas I did some shrinking and also adding a little bit of stretch right into the center area. Okay, so here we are, after one round of shrinking on the sides, and then I ran it through the planishing hammer quick, just to clean it up a little bit. In the power hammer, I did a little bit of stretching in the center, but really not much at all. So now I'm going to jump on the English wheel with a high crown wheel. I'm going to put a little bit of stretch in the center, and that'll help get us to where we need to be. Now I've thrown on a number 6 radius lower wheel, and I'm going to wheel out the whole panel quick and check my progress. Getting closer to where I need to be, but use my radius gauge, I still have ways to go. So I'm going to go jump on the power hammer. I'm going to do another round of shrinking evenly through these sides. We have the rough shape developed, so now it's just exaggerating what needs to be done to get it where we need to be. If you notice, I still haven't touched at all up here where the reverse curve is. I want to get this section close, 90%, and then we'll deal with that. I've got the panel pretty close to where we need it to be. Just about at that 6-inch radius all the way around. Got it backwards, but see, it's starting to fit the buck. So now it's time to tackle this reverse curve section. You see I've left all this alone, except for a mistake hammer hit right there from the power hammer, but that's okay, it didn't really do much. So now what I need to do is start stretching here and here. And what that stretch is going to do is as this edge comes around, it's going to make our reverse come up. This section is a no-fly zone. I do not want to stretch in this area at all. If I stretch in this area, I need to stretch in these areas even more. And the goal is to stretch as little as possible. So I might reel in here just to get that hammer mark out, but other than that, absolutely no stretches. I'm going to stretch these areas as I bring this edge around to match the radius up here, that number 6 radius coming around. And I'll be blocking in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the blocking hammer on the stump to get that stretch done real quick. And then I'll get on the wheel and start wheeling it out. Towards the end, I'll do some stretching in here. But for right now, I'm just going to focus on these areas and let the stretch on these sides bring it out. And remember, if you're trying this, do not touch this area. You need the biggest contrast you can get between this area and these areas. Let's get to it. I don't know if you can see it behind me, but I've got my water feature in full effect. I have that whenever it rains. It's a nice touch. So we'll get started stretching these edges. And again, I'm going to leave this middle alone. So I've just been going back and forth between stretching on the stump and then bringing it over to the wheel, planishing it out. Being careful to avoid that center spot. You also see I just took some snips and I took off the squared off corners in the front. It was just a lot of extra material to stretch for no reason. That'd be trimmed off anyways. So it kind of helps move things along a little faster. So I'm just stretching and planishing out right along that front bill. I'll get this other side. And you can see I'm using the wheel a little bit to help accentuate the shape. As I go in, I'm lifting up. The same thing, coming back across the front and lifting up. Eventually, I'll very lightly planish in that center spot, but not yet. Okay, this other side. All right, I think it's time to throw it on the buck, see how it looks. I'm just wiping down the panel with a little bit of acetone. I try to keep my panels nice and clean, especially when working on the wheel. But as you can see, the shape is starting to come out now. It's looking really good, I think. You can see the reverse now pretty clearly. It's sitting on the buck pretty good. It's looking really close. So now I'm in the fine-tuning stage. I'm going to go through, I'm going to make sure my radius is consistent throughout the whole panel. I'm also going to now start lightly wheeling in this center section I haven't touched yet. So I just want to wheel with very light pressure. I don't want any stretching in there, as little as possible, because any stretching that happens in that section is going to take away from my reverse, and I don't want that. So I'm going to lightly wheel that out just to smooth it. I'll probably do a little more work on this reverse, try to make it come up a little bit more. You can really make it reverse as much as you want. It's just a matter of stretching that material and how far you want to go with it. So once I get everything in this fitting nice and tight to the buck and just how I want it, that's when I'll go ahead and start turning those flanges on the side. But you really want to make sure everything is good before you turn those flanges, because once they're tipped, it limits where you can get to with the wheel. You can only get so close to the edge of the panel, things like that. So I'm going to start that fine tuning, and we'll see how it looks. So now I'm going to set my pressure very light. There we go. Just go wheel right with the reverse, nice and carefully. Okay, I've got my reverse where I like it. I feel like it's looking pretty good. I've run into a little bit of an issue that you might run into. It's really common. The radius of this inside reverse, so the inside radius here, is actually tighter than the radius of my top wheel. So if I were to insert it this way like I was now, it's going to flatten out this radius because this is larger. It's going to want to press it flat. It won't roll through the entire thing smoothly. So what you do in this case is get the panel in this way, using a bottom wheel that matches the radius best you can this way. And set some light pressure once you're in. And then carefully wheel it out like this. Now this is very hard to do without blocking the camera, but I think this gives you an idea. I've already done it pretty much. Just needs a little bit more just to smooth things out. There we go. Let's put it on the buck, see how it's fitting. I spent some time wheeling out the Fender, picking up any low spots I found, getting it looking pretty good. Look at it. And it's fitting the buck pretty good. One thing I did change up on this Fender is the the original one I made this reverse section flat. So it kind of reversed up, and this kind of duckbill that kicks up was straight across. On this one I decided to put a radius on it. I think it looks a little bit better. So when fitting up to my buck, it actually hits just a little bit. That's just because if I flattened this off, I'd have deeper sort of pockets in the corner and it would sit on the buck better. But I think it just looks better this way, so I'm going to go with that. So now I'm at the point where I'm happy with it, and I'm going to get ready to turning the edges. So I'm going to grab some stuff to lay that out and get that done. I went ahead and I started turning this flange, put in a nice edge. And you can see, once you start turning these flanges, put a nice crisp edge, it really starts to look like something. So I'll show you how I did it. So going on this side, I grabbed a pair of calipers, the distance I needed for the flange, and I just scribed the line right along the inside. Now, the edges here aren't perfect from working the panel. So the line is good enough to see where we need to be, but if you start hammering right along that line, you're going to get a wavy edge. So what I like to do is grab some masking tape and lay down a tape line to smooth everything out and have a good guide for your chase when we start turning this flange. Okay, my tape is nice and even. I thought I screwed up there for a second, but it's good. So, next step is to grab a chase. So, I made this out of a railroad spike, obviously. I come across these a lot in my area, and I like to make things out of them, like this chase. So, I rounded it so it's not a sharp point, and I put a little radius on it this way. And I just regrind them to whatever I need them for. And you know, if something happens to it, I just toss it and grab another one. So I'm going to start at one end and work my way into the sandbag gently. This is slow. You want to take this process slow, don't go hammering away, but nice and gently. I'll work my chase right down along this tape line, and you'll see it'll put the crease in that we need to turn the flange. So I've gone the full length of the Fender. I don't know how well the camera picks it up, but you can see this edge tipped over nicely. We have a nice straight line there, but it has ripples in the line, so I'll show you how I take care of that. I grab a piece of scrap wood. Like I said, on my sandbag, because the bag holds it steady when I'm working. And I just lay the Fender on it. It's a little tricky to hold sometimes in place, but you want your flange line right up against the wood, and I'm just going to lightly tap and slide my chase right along the line. Because I already did set the line, my chase will follow along with it easily, and I get a good line. It's already looking better, and I'll do another pass once these flanges are turned. It'll be easier to hold it steady and get that worked out nice. So now we'll go over to the shrinker and start doing some shrinking and turning this down. So here's my Bailey Kick shrinker. I actually just got this. It's my first time really using it for something. I'm just kind of playing with it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do a series of light shrinks throughout this whole radius, and then we'll tape the flanges a little bit, see where we're at, and then continue on like that. That's a problem. Okay, let's go turn these flanges a little bit and see how we're looking. To turn these flanges over, I'm going to keep it simple. I have this pair of, I guess they could be called panel pliers or maybe flanging pliers. And I'm just going to simply grab it and just bend it down and let it bend right along the line we set. If your pliers, whatever you're using the flange, doesn't reach all the way to the line, you'll get what just happened here. It mainly turned at the line we set, but actually put a little bit of bulge in that space between where my pliers bottom out and the line. So, easy enough to fix. Just grab a dolly with a flat face, hammer. I'm setting this inside edge of my dolly in the line that we set, and I'm going to use the flat face and just continue like that. I don't know if you can see, but that straightens it right out. So, got this flange turned pretty far. I'm going to go ahead and finish straightening it out because I'm not going to get a real look at, where the panel's at as far as shrink and stretch until these flanges are where I want them. I went and made myself a quick profile gauge out of some poster board. You can see this fits the profile of the buck. So this is a really good way to tell where you're at with your panel. I actually make these for everything I make using a buck. This is a good way to see how your progress is going from the outside. If it's a real important part, if it's bigger, if it's something I need to be really accurate on, I'll actually make these out of a strip of aluminum and shrink and stretch the edges to get the curve I need. But for something like this, just a quick one out of some scrap poster board works out really well. And you can see, using the profile gauge, that this panel is way off. This should be sitting tight on the panel, but it's hitting on both ends. So I'm going to go over to the shrinker and just slowly work both these edges evenly until I bring it back in to the profile that we need. I'll use the profile gauge to check my progress. One tip when you're doing this portion of it is don't just shrink the whole panel right off the bat, because it might not be evenly out of shape. It might be this section's fine, but this section and this section's off. So what I like to do is I'll actually use, if I have a flexible gauge like this, is I'll bend it and I'll check out sections and get each section correct and then move on to the next. But take your time with this because it's real easy to look at it and think you need to shrink in one area, but really it's the other area that's holding up the pattern. And once you shrink that, it'll sit nice. Okay, so I'm just going to work my way through that, back and forth, checking my progress, going slowly, and we'll see how it does. Alright, after some back and forth to the shrinker, got it fitting up here pretty good. So next thing I'm going to do is actually grab my pliers and open up this flange just a little bit again. Now that I know I have it pretty much where I want it, I just open it up a little bit. I'll be able to go over and get in my planishing hammer and clean up the shrink area a little bit, get this all smoothed out. What I might have to do is planish it, and then find I gotta shrink it a little bit more and actually over shrink it in some spots, and then planish it smooth again. But that's the best, and it's going to be the fastest way to get this all smoothed out so we have a nice product.